These common foods could be quietly feeding cancer cells and weakening your body's defenses. Knowing which ones to avoid can make a huge difference for your health. Stay until the end. The last one is the most shocking of all. You are what you eat. The surprising link between food and your body's defenses. It's a startling statistic that roughly 4 out of every 10 people will face a cancer diagnosis at some point in their lives. While it's true that our genetics play a role in this, and sometimes it can feel like the luck of the draw, there's a powerful and hopeful side to this story. A significant portion of cancers, up to 40%, are considered preventable. This doesn't mean we can change the genes we were born with, but we can absolutely influence how those genes behave. One of the most impactful ways to do this, to guide your body towards health and away from disease, is through your daily diet. Many cancers aren't just a matter of faulty genes. They are also deeply connected to our metabolism and the strength of our immune system. The very foods we eat, even those we might consider to be part of a normal or even healthy diet, can sometimes create the perfect environment for cancer to take root and flourish. Understanding this connection is the first step toward taking control and actively lowering your risk. To understand how food can either fight or feed cancer, it's helpful to know what cancer cells need to survive and grow. It all begins when a normal, healthy cell in your body undergoes a mutation, a small change in its genetic code. This happens all the time, but usually our bodies are excellent at repairing these tiny errors or getting rid of the damaged cell. However, if a mutated cell escapes these defenses, it has the potential to multiply uncontrollably. For this to happen, several things need to fall into place. First and foremost, cancer cells are incredibly hungry for fuel, with a particular appetite for glucose, a type of sugar. They also rely on certain hormones, like insulin, and a growth factor known as IGF-1, which act as signals telling them to grow and divide. Furthermore, these rogue cells thrive in an environment of inflammation, which helps break down the body's natural barriers and weakens our immune system, our primary defense against cancer. Finally, to sustain their rapid growth, cancer cells need their own private supply line for nutrients, which they get by creating new blood vessels, a process called angiogenesis. Unfortunately, many common foods in our modern diet can inadvertently provide cancer with all of these essential elements. But the good news is that this knowledge is a double-edged sword. By understanding what fuels cancer, we can make conscious choices to starve it instead. The hidden dangers in your pantry, a closer look at aflatoxins. Let's start with something you might not have heard of, but is considered one of the most potent, naturally occurring cancer-causing substances: aflatoxins. These are toxins produced by certain types of mold that can grow on foods we eat regularly, such as grains, corn, peanuts, and tree nuts like almonds, walnuts, and pistachios. It's important to be clear that there's nothing inherently wrong with these foods. In fact, nuts can be a very healthy part of your diet. The concern lies with potential mold contamination, which is more common in nuts and grains that come from warm and humid climates. This contamination isn't always visible, and it can also find its way into our diets indirectly through products like peanut butter or almond butter, which may be made from nuts that haven't undergone strict inspection for mold. Another sneaky route for these toxins is through milk and dairy products. If cows are fed with corn or other grains that are contaminated with aflatoxins, a specific type called M1 can be present in their milk. So how can you protect yourself? When you're buying nuts and grains, try to choose brands that source their products from regions that are not prone to high humidity, as this reduces the risk of mold growth. When you have nuts at home, give them a quick inspection and avoid eating any that look discolored, shriveled, or just don't seem right. It's also a good idea to use them within a month or so of buying them and to always check the expiration date. A helpful tip is that roasting nuts, especially peanuts and pistachios, can help reduce the levels of aflatoxins, although it may not eliminate them completely. By being a little more mindful of where your food comes from and how it's stored, you can significantly lower your exposure to these hidden toxins. The sweet danger: how sugar fuels cancer's growth. It probably comes as no surprise that foods loaded with sugar and processed carbohydrates are linked to an increased risk of several types of cancer, particularly breast, colon, and possibly pancreatic cancer. But why is this? To put it simply, cancer cells have an insatiable sweet tooth. Think of your body as being made up of trillions of tiny efficient engines, your cells. These engines normally burn fuel, including glucose, in a very controlled and effective way to give you energy. Cancer cells, on the other hand, are like broken, inefficient engines. They burn through fuel at an astonishing rate, and their favorite fuel by far is glucose. This sugar is what your body produces from foods like white bread, pasta, cookies, candy, and sugary drinks. There's a scientific explanation for this phenomenon known as the Warburg effect, where cancer cells choose to burn sugar very rapidly, even when there are more efficient ways to get energy. They don't care about efficiency. Their only goal is to grow and multiply as quickly as possible. When you consume foods that cause a sharp spike in your blood sugar, your body releases hormones like insulin and IGF-1. In a healthy body, this is a normal process. However, when it happens in excess, these hormones send a powerful message to all your cells, including any potential cancer cells, telling them it's time to grow and divide. So, you end up in a situation where you're not only feeding cancer cells their preferred food source, but you're also ramping up the signals in your body that encourage them to multiply faster. Studies on breast cancer have shown that some cancer cells can have up to 6 times more insulin receptors than healthy cells, making them incredibly sensitive to these growth signals. As if that weren't enough, excess sugar in your diet also leads to chronic inflammation, which can cause further damage to your DNA, making it even easier for cancer to develop. This inflammation also weakens your immune system, which is your body's first line of defense against these rogue cells. The key takeaway here is that since cancer cells are so dependent on sugar, we can use this to our advantage. By choosing foods that don't cause dramatic blood sugar spikes, we can essentially starve cancer cells while still nourishing the rest of our body. This means limiting processed and high glycemic carbohydrates and instead focusing on low glycemic, high fiber foods like beans, whole grains, vegetables, and berries. And if you're a regular soda drinker, switching to water, tea, or even a diet soda can be a simple yet impactful change to make today. The great debate: red meat, processed meats, and cancer risk. The topic of red meat and processed meat and their connection to cancer can be a bit confusing, as the science isn't as straightforward as some headlines might suggest. There have been numerous studies that have shown a link between a high intake of processed meats like ham, bacon, sausages, and hot dogs, as well as red meat such as beef, pork, and lamb, with an increased risk of certain cancers, especially colorectal cancer. However, it's important to understand that these are often observational studies, which means they can show an association, but they don't necessarily prove cause and effect. In these studies, researchers look at what people eat and then track who develops cancer. What they've noticed is that people who eat more processed and red meat tend to have a higher likelihood of getting colon cancer. The challenge with these studies is that it's difficult to separate the impact of the meat itself from other lifestyle factors. For instance, do people who eat a lot of red meat also tend to smoke more or exercise less? On the other hand, do people who eat less meat have more access to fresh foods and better health care? This is what's known as the healthy user bias. It might not be the meat itself, but rather other behaviors that could explain the differences in cancer rates. However, there are plausible reasons why red and processed meats might increase cancer risk. Many processed meats contain nitrites, which are used as preservatives. When these nitrites reach the acidic environment of your stomach, they can be converted into compounds called nitrosamines, which are known to be cancer-causing, particularly for stomach cancer. Additionally, the way we cook meat matters. Grilling, frying, or barbecuing meat at high temperatures can create chemicals called heterocyclic amines, HCAs, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, both of which have been shown in animal studies to damage DNA and promote cancer. So, what's the bottom line? While the evidence is complex, there's a consistent association between high intakes of processed and red meat and cancer. It may not be the red meat itself that is the sole culprit, but perhaps what it's replacing in the diet. When you eat more red and processed meat, you're likely eating less of something else, and that something else is often fiber-rich foods like fruits, vegetables, beans, and whole grains. We have strong evidence from numerous studies showing that people with a higher intake of dietary fiber have a lower risk of several cancers and a significant reduction in cancer-related mortality. Therefore, you don't necessarily need to completely give up red meat or your summer barbecue, but it's probably wise not to overdo it and to make a conscious effort to load up on high-fiber foods with every meal. A toast to your health, reconsidering alcohol's role. For a long time, we've heard mixed messages about alcohol, with some suggesting a glass of red wine might even be good for the heart. However, when it comes to cancer, the scientific evidence is quite clear. Alcohol is a direct cause of cancer. The International Agency for Research on Cancer classified alcohol as a Group 1 carcinogen back in 1987, meaning there is sufficient evidence that it causes cancer in humans. This includes cancers of the mouth, throat, esophagus, and liver. There's also a strong association between alcohol consumption and breast cancer in women, as well as colorectal cancer. Alcohol can lead to cancer in several ways. When your liver metabolizes alcohol, it produces a toxic chemical called acetaldehyde, which can directly damage your DNA and interfere with your body's ability to repair it. Alcohol consumption also leads to deficiencies in essential vitamins, such as vitamin B1, thiamine, which is crucial for the healthy functioning of our cells and energy metabolism. It can also impair the body's ability to absorb folate, another B vitamin, and a deficiency in folate can lead to errors when your DNA is being synthesized. On top of all this, alcohol acts as a solvent, making it easier for other cancer-causing substances, like those from tobacco smoke, to be absorbed into your body's tissues. Taking all of this into account, it's clear that from a cancer prevention standpoint, limiting or avoiding alcohol is one of the most beneficial things you can do for your long-term health.